The choice to be complete. When society's expectations met personal truth, the question lingered in the air like incense in a temple, sacred, heavy, demanding reverence. Steve Harvey stood at his podium, with the confidence of a man who had navigated thousands of conversations. But something in the atmosphere had shifted. The bright studio lights seemed harsher suddenly, illuminating not just the stage but the complex web of assumptions that satire weaves around women's choices. Dr. Priya Patel stood at the contestant podium, her posture reflecting years of defending decisions that shouldn't need defending. At 42, she possessed the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to stand firm in the face of judgment. Her navy blue blazer was perfectly tailored, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant bun that spoke of professionalism and purpose. But in her eyes, those deep brown eyes that had seen into countless hearts during cardiac surgeries, there was a weariness that had nothing to do with her demanding career. "We asked 100 people," Steve had announced with his signature enthusiasm. "Name something people assume about you." He'd expected the usual responses that made for entertaining television: that you're older than you are. Maybe. That you're wealthy. That you're from somewhere else. The kinds of assumptions that would generate laughs and knowing nods from the audience before moving the game along. Instead, Dr. Patel looked directly into his eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had spent years performing life-saving surgery, and delivered an answer that would transform this episode from entertainment into something approaching social commentary. "That I'm broken because I don't want children." The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable pause of a game show. It was the profound quiet that comes when someone speaks a truth that society pretends doesn't exist. Steve's smile flickered as he processed what she'd said, recognizing in her voice the particular pain of being judged for choices that harmed no one but challenged everything. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. These were mostly families who had come to enjoy a light-hearted game show, not to confront the complex reality of women who chose different paths. Some faces showed confusion, others recognition, still others the uncomfortable awareness that they might have made the very assumptions Dr. Patel was describing. Behind the cameras, producers scrambled to understand what was happening. This wasn't part of any show format they'd prepared for. Contestants were supposed to be relatable, entertaining, focused on winning prizes. They weren't supposed to challenge fundamental societal assumptions about women's roles and choices on national television. Dr. Priya Patel had been a cardiothoracic surgeon for 12 years, one of only a handful of women in her specialty at Massachusetts General Hospital. She saved lives daily, performed miracles with scalpels and sutures, was respected by colleagues and beloved by patients. But none of that seemed to matter when conversations turned to her personal life. When well-meaning people discovered that she and her husband Raj had chosen not to have children, the questions always came. "When are you starting a family? Don't you want kids? What are you waiting for? You'd be such a good mother. You're running out of time. Who will take care of you when you're old? Isn't that selfish? There must be something wrong. Have you tried fertility treatments? Maybe you just haven't met the right child yet." Each question carried the implicit assumption that her life was incomplete, that her choice was temporary, that she simply hadn't understood what she was missing. Each conversation left her feeling like she had to justify her existence, defend her happiness, prove that a woman could be whole without children. "Dr. Patel," Steve said softly, setting down his cards and moving away from his podium. Something in her expression had triggered every instinct he'd developed over decades of reading people who carried invisible burdens. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was an accomplished woman being forced to defend her right to define her own completeness. "Tell me what you mean by that." The question opened something in Priya that had been carefully sealed for years. Her professional composure, maintained through countless challenges in a male-dominated field, began to crack. Not because she was ashamed of her choice, but because she was exhausted from having to explain it. She began, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had given this explanation countless times, that people assume there's something fundamentally wrong with a woman who doesn't want to be a mother. They assume I'm broken or selfish, or that I just haven't figured out what I'm missing yet. The Patel family stood at their team podium. Her husband Raj, her sister-in-law Meera, her brother-in-law Arjun, and her mother-in-law Kamala, all of them shifting uncomfortably as their private struggles were exposed under studio lights. What had started as a fun family outing was becoming something none of them had anticipated. Last month, Priya continued, her voice gaining strength even as tears gathered in her eyes. I was at a medical conference. I just presented research that could save thousands of lives. At the networking dinner, the first question someone asked me wasn't about my research or my surgical techniques. It was, so, do you have kids? When I said no, the entire conversation changed. Suddenly, I wasn't Dr. Patel the surgeon. I was Dr. Patel the woman who was somehow failing at being a woman. The rival family, the Johnson clan from Georgia, stood frozen at their podium. They were a large traditional family with 6 children between them, and they'd never considered that their family size might make others feel judged. They'd come to compete and have fun, not to confront the reality that their assumptions about family might hurt people they'd never even met. People tell me I'd be a great mother, Priya said, looking directly at the camera, speaking to millions of viewers who might have said those exact words to childless women in their own lives. They mean it as a compliment. But what I hear is that they think the greatest thing I could do with my life is something I don't want to do. They can't imagine that I might find fulfillment in saving lives instead of creating them. Steve found himself moving closer to her, drawn by recognition of a particular kind of pain. The pain of being misunderstood, not for what you'd done wrong, but for what you'd chosen not to do. The pain of having your entire identity reduced to one decision that others couldn't accept. What's the hardest part? Steve asked gently. The hardest part, Priya said, and now her voice was thick with emotion, is that people act like my choice is a rejection of their choices. When I say I don't want children, mothers sometimes hear that I think there's something wrong with wanting children. When I say I'm fulfilled by my career, they hear that I think stay-at-home mothers are wasting their lives. She paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue that had materialized from somewhere in the audience. A grandmother in the front row, who recognized someone in pain, regardless of whether she understood the source. I don't judge anyone for wanting children, Priya continued. I think people who choose to be parents are taking on one of the most important jobs in the world. But I also think people who choose not to be parents are making an equally valid choice about how to contribute to the world. The studio audience was beginning to react, not with applause or cheers, but with the quiet sounds of recognition and discomfort. Some people nodded understanding, others shifted uncomfortably as they recognized their own assumptions being challenged. My mother-in-law, Priya said, glancing at Kamala with a mixture of love and exhaustion. She's a wonderful woman who raised 4 successful children. But every family dinner becomes a conversation about when Raj and I are going to give her grandchildren, as if our purpose in life is to fulfill her dreams rather than our own. Kamala Patel stood at the family podium with tears in her eyes, suddenly seeing her well-intentioned questions through her daughter-in-law's perspective for the first time. And my patients, Priya said, her voice breaking slightly, I've held their hearts in my hands. I've brought them back from the edge of death. I've given them years of life they wouldn't have had without my skills and dedication. But when they find out I don't have children, some of them look at me like I'm missing some essential part of what makes life meaningful. Steve Harvey had spent decades hosting television shows, meeting thousands of people, hearing countless stories of triumph and struggle. But standing there looking at Dr. Priya Patel, he saw something that demanded more than entertainment value. He saw a successful, accomplished woman being forced to justify her right to define her own happiness. Priya, Steve said, using her first name now, making the connection more personal. What would you say to someone who thinks you're missing something? I would say, Priya answered, her voice growing stronger with conviction, that I'm not missing anything. I'm complete exactly as I am. I save lives. I contribute to medical knowledge that will help future generations. I'm a loving wife, daughter, sister, friend, and mentor. I volunteer at free clinics. I teach medical students. I have a life full of purpose, joy, love, and meaning. She looked directly into the camera, speaking to every woman who had ever been made to feel incomplete for choosing a different path. I would say that there's no single way to be a woman. There's no single way to contribute to the world. There's no single way to find meaning and purpose and fulfillment. And there's nothing broken about a woman who knows what she wants and has the courage to live accordingly. The Johnson family, their competitors in this forgotten game, had abandoned any pretense of competition. Martha Johnson, mother of 4 who had always assumed that all women wanted what she wanted, found herself questioning assumptions she'd never examined. Steve felt something shift in his own understanding. As a father himself, he'd always assumed that everyone wanted what he wanted. The joy of raising children, the pride of watching them grow. But looking at Dr. Patel, he saw something he'd never considered, that different people found meaning in different ways, and that all of those ways could be valid. What do you wish people understood? Steve asked. I wish they understood that choosing not to have children doesn't make me selfish. Priya said immediately. If anything, it's the opposite. I know that I don't have the patience, the maternal instinct, or the desire to be the kind of parent that children deserve. Choosing not to have children when you don't want them, that's responsible, not selfish. She paused, looking out at the audience of mostly families, hoping they could understand what she was trying to communicate. I wish they understood that my value as a woman isn't measured by my reproductive choices. I wish they understood that asking, "When are you having kids?" is like asking, "When are you going to live your life the way I think you should?" I wish they understood that you'd be a great mother isn't always a compliment when you never wanted to be a mother at all. Steve began removing his suit jacket, his movements deliberate and symbolic. The jacket was charcoal gray, expensive, representing cent achievement earned through talent and hard work. Priya, Steve said, draping the jacket around her shoulders. This jacket represents something I've worked my whole life to achieve. It represents success, recognition, the fulfillment of dreams. You know what it doesn't represent? Priya looked up at him, curious about where he was leading. It doesn't represent the only way to be successful, Steve continued. It doesn't represent the only way to find meaning. It doesn't represent the only path to happiness. There are millions of ways to build a meaningful life, and every person gets to choose which way is right for them. The jacket was too big for Priya's frame, but she pulled it closer as if it were armor against a world that constantly questioned her choices. Your worth, Steve said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned hard truths about success and fulfillment, isn't measured by whether you conform to other people's expectations. It's measured by whether you're living authentically, contributing positively, and finding joy in the life you've chosen to build. The studio audience began to react, not with the typical applause of entertainment, but with the thoughtful response of people processing new ideas. Some were nodding in understanding, others were clearly struggling with concepts that challenged their fundamental assumptions about women's roles. To every woman watching this, Steve said, turning to address the camera directly, you get to decide what makes your life complete. You get to decide what brings you joy, what gives you purpose, what makes you feel fulfilled, and you don't owe anyone an explanation for choices that are yours to make. He turned back to Priya, his expression filled with respect and admiration. And to you, Dr. Patel, I want to say thank you. Thank you for saving lives. Thank you for pushing boundaries in your field. Thank you for showing young women that there are many ways to make a difference in the world. And thank you for having the courage to live your truth, even when it makes other people uncomfortable. The game show had been completely forgotten. This wasn't about points or prizes anymore. This was about challenging assumptions, expanding definitions of success, and recognizing that women's value extends far beyond their reproductive choices. There's something I want to share, Priya said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small photograph. It showed her in surgical scrubs, surrounded by her medical team, all of them smiling after a successful operation. This was taken after a surgery, where we saved a 6-year-old boy's life, she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. His heart had a defect that would have killed him without intervention. When I see his parents thank me for giving them more time with their child, when I know that he'll grow up to have a life he wouldn't have had without my skills, that's my contribution to the future. Steve studied the photo, then looked back at Priya with new understanding. That little boy is alive because of your choices, he said. He's alive because you chose to dedicate your life to medicine instead of motherhood. His parents get to watch him grow up because you made the choice that was right for you. Exactly, Priya said, her voice strong now. I may not be creating new life, but I'm preserving life. I may not be raising children, but I'm making it possible for other people's children to be raised. I'm contributing to the future in my own way. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his business card, writing something on the back before handing it to Priya. I'm writing down the name of a producer I know, he said. She's working on a documentary about women who are changing the world in unexpected ways. I think your story needs to be heard. Priya took the card with tears in her eyes. It wasn't just paper and ink. It was validation, recognition that her choice mattered, that her perspective had value. As confetti fell and the celebration music played, something unprecedented happened. Members of the Johnson family crossed the stage to embrace the Patel family. Not as competitors, but as people who had learned something important about acceptance and understanding. Martha Johnson, the mother of 4, approached Priya directly. I owe you an apology, she said, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. I've asked women your question about children without thinking about how it might make them feel. I never considered that there might be women who chose differently and were happy with their choice. You don't need to apologize, Priya said gently. You just need to understand that happiness comes in many forms. The episode aired 2 months later, generating more discussion than any Family Feud episode in the show's history. Online forums exploded with conversations about women's choices, societal expectations, and the pressure to conform to traditional roles. The episode became required viewing in several university sociology courses and was referenced in numerous articles about reproductive choices and women's autonomy. But perhaps most importantly, it sparked conversations in homes across America, where childless women finally felt seen and understood, where families began to question their assumptions, where the definition of a complete life expanded to include paths that had been overlooked or dismissed. 6 months after the episode aired, Steve Harvey received an email from Boston. It came with a photograph showing Dr. Priya Patel receiving an award for her contributions to cardiac surgery, surrounded by colleagues, friends, and a beaming husband, Raj. Mr. Harvey, the email read, I wanted you to thank you for giving me a platform to share my truth. The response has been overwhelming. I've heard from hundreds of women who said they felt less alone after watching the episode. I've also heard from people who said they never considered that childless women might be happy with their choice. The email continued. But most importantly, I've heard from young women in medical school who said they were empowered to pursue demanding careers without feeling like they had to choose between professional success and social acceptance. If I can save lives and also help women feel free to make authentic choices about their own lives, then I feel like I'm contributing to the world in multiple ways. Today, Dr. Priya Patel continues to save lives at Massachusetts General Hospital. She also speaks at conferences about work-life balance and women's choices in medicine. Her office wall features the framed Family Feud episode photo, Steve's business card, and letters from patients whose lives she saved, reminders that contribution and meaning come in many forms. She still gets questions about children sometimes, but now she answers them differently. Instead of feeling defensive, she feels confident. Instead of explaining or justifying, she simply states her truth. She's complete exactly as she is. contributing to the world in ways that fulfill her, living authentically in a life she's chosen. The choice to be childless, Priya learned, isn't about what's missing from your life. It's about what you choose to fill your life with instead. And sometimes the most important lesson you can teach is that there's no single way to be a woman, no single path to fulfillment, no single definition of a life well lived. Her worth isn't measured by what she creates in her womb, but by what she creates in the world. And that, she discovered, is more than enough. It's everything.